everyone. Welcome to Church Coffee, Christianity, Conservatism, and Culture. I'm one of your co-hosts, Rob, and today we're joined by Juan Peña. He's a co-founder of Cross Purpose, and we're talking today on illegal immigration and kind of more practical on in Denver about this topic. So, Juan, welcome to Church Coffee.
Thank you, Rob. I'm really glad to have this conversation.
Uh, our intro question, as always, is how do you take your coffee?
Well, I like cold brew in the summer. So my wife and I are very, very big cold brew fans. We brew it in our own home, and that's pretty much exclusively what I drink. Colombian coffee that is cold brewed.
Nice. I highly approve of cold brew in the summer.
Yes, yes.
And so, what's your story? How did you come to work for Cross Purpose, or I guess more, why did you decide to
Mhm.
found Cross Purpose, and what motivates you in this specific area?
Yeah, so and since we're having a conversation around immigration, I'll kind of start a little bit with my story because I am an immigrant myself. I was born in Colombia, South America, and my dad was a national pastor through the Presbyterian Church in, in my hometown of Girardot, Colombia. And then when I was 14 years old, my family migrated from Colombia to the United States so that my dad could go to seminary at Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary. So that's what brought us here to the United States, and kind of have gone through the full immigrant experience of poverty, not knowing the language, seeing our family really struggle. It's interesting growing up in Colombia in a very poor country. My life didn't seem to be a struggle, even though obviously we didn't have the resources and the riches that could be found here in the United States. But yeah, coming to the U.S. was just a very difficult transition. So
And what
um,
year did your
that
dad
would
come
have
to
been
Gordon Caldwell? What year?
1989
Okay.
is when we migrated here. So yeah, and I was entering ninth grade. And yeah, so as a kid, I had to, you know, Gordon Conwell isn't a fairly, there's not too many Latinos in that area. So
Yeah, I
I
was
was
going to
actually
ask
the
if you guys
only,
actually lived in Boston or lived much closer
no, we
to
lived on
the.
campus. And yeah, so it turned out that I was the only Latino in the high school that I attended. So yeah, so you can imagine, I had some experiences there that it took me decades to kind of like really process and get over. Honestly, as I'm excited about the conversation because over the last couple of years, I've seen how every experience in my life really has been preparing me for this moment in time. Um, so yeah, so background of an immigrant, somehow managed to graduate from high school. And then I went off to University of Massachusetts and got a mechanical engineering degree. After that, I practiced engineering for 11 years, got married in the middle of that. And I felt like God was calling me into the ministry. And so we left my engineering job in Rhode Island back in 2002 and moved to Pennsylvania to pursue seminary education, and I ended up planting a multi-ethnic church while I was there.
So
And I think
I assume if you went to seminary in Pennsylvania, it might be Westminster
actually it
or.
wasn't. No, no, it wasn't that one. I ended up going to a smaller seminary. It was a Baptist seminary. And the reason I went there, so there was a professor there that was a church planter, and he had this, like, he started talking to me about multi-ethnic church planting. And I was like, multi what? And I had never heard about multi-ethnic churches. And so that really piqued my interest. And so my wife and I moved to Pennsylvania to the Scranton area for 6 years, planted a multi-ethnic church while I was in seminary and doing engineering full time. Not recommended to anybody. And then after that, after I finished seminary, I felt like I was calling me to now move to Denver to join a small team of about three couples that we had a vision to move into one of the hardest neighborhoods in the city. And I told my wife that that was going to be a 30-year plan, a 30-year commitment. So yeah, so in 2008, we ended up moving to the northeast side of Denver. At that time, it had the highest rate of poverty in the Denver metro area, highest rate of single parent homes, highest rate of incarceration. And so we just wanted to start a church, a multi-ethnic church and a multilingual church in those neighborhoods. And yet I call it an experiment. The experiment was, can the Church of Jesus Christ transform a neighborhood in one generation? And so yeah, so we moved into the neighborhood with this 30-year commitment. I ended up getting left the engineering field, and because I've always been bivocational. I needed a job, so I became a truancy officer at one of the worst elementary schools, performing wise, educational, in the state of Colorado, and it happened to be half a mile from my house. So for 2 years, I got to go, and this is probably a theme that you'll see throughout the whole podcast. I'm very much a hands-on person. I need to like really be touch the problem to really understand the problem, so we can come up with thoughtful solutions. And so for 2 years, I worked there, and I got paid to go and knock on the doors of my neighbors whenever kids are not in school to just kind of inquire, like, hey, why isn't your son in school or your daughter in school? And have a conversation and try to, get the kids to school and all that. So out of that, we started a church called Providence Bible Church here in Denver. And then a few years later, we started Cross Purpose, which is we started with about 20 neighbors, and our vision was to help our neighbors escape poverty once and for all. And we know that, a great job, a good job, a career job is really the answer on how to help our neighbors get out of poverty. So our church, barely 4 years old, kind of launched into like this vision to help our neighbors get out of poverty. And we started with 20 neighbors in 2012, and today we are spread out across 4 campuses across the metro area. We have helped over 1,000 neighbors escape poverty through career jobs, and it's grown to be the biggest workforce development organization in Colorado. Um,
That's
so
amazing.
that's kind of like a little bit of my story. I can get into how I got involved specifically with immigration. At this point, if we can go, I can do that later.
Let's do that later. That'll
Okay.
probably dovetail with some other
Yeah,
questions.
perfect.
First, though, like escaping poverty, I want to ask just your a question that I just thought of. The Brookings Institute, big research
Hmm.
institute, uh, has pointed to three kind of triangle factions of how to escape poverty and to at least get into the middle class, which would be um, graduate high school or get a GED. Um, don't have kids until you're married, and
Hmm.
get a job and stick with it. Like just get a job,
Yep.
work long hours, work hard hours. Do you find that that is
Yeah.
roughly
On.
in line with
Yeah.
what you've seen about in your ministry, or is there any tweaks that should be there? Just give me your thoughts.
Yeah. No, I totally. Yeah. And I read a lot of the Brookings Institute's findings. They're really helpful. Yeah. Our mission is to help our neighbors escape. The mission statement is to abolish economic, relational, and spiritual poverty through career and community development. And so, yeah, when we look at poverty from our end as a church, we look at it in a very holistic way. And so we know that there's personal responsibility, right? Every able-bodied person should be pursuing work. We believe, rightfully so, that is dignifying, and that is what the best way to get out of poverty, right? You need a job. The better the job, obviously, the better. But as I've spent, and obviously with my immigrant experience, I've seen a lot of like immigrants struggle. They're like my dad was a pastor of a church of 600 people in my hometown, the second largest Presbyterian church. And then when we come here, he doesn't know English. And like we struggled barely with a church of 40, 50 people. And just nobody ever saw him as a leader just because he just didn't know English. Right. And he was an incredible, and that church in my hometown had a school with 1,000 students. My dad was an incredible leader. Just happens that he didn't know English and he became almost nothing here. Does that make sense? So they're very capable people, but because of issues in our culture or in our institutions, they just have, it's harder for them to get those great jobs. It's another issue that barrier that a lot of our neighbors, and I think across, this bears true across the nation. Our school systems in our inner cities are really not, they're not just not performing well for decades, right? And so it's not unusual for me to see a neighbor that graduated from Denver Public Schools, um, all the way to 12th grade. But when we do a reading and math assessment, they are at a third, fourth, fifth grade reading level or math level, right? And so like there has been a massive failure because this person went to school all their lives and yet still doesn't have an education. Well, when you're reading at a fifth grade reading level, your options are going to be very limited, right? And so that's where, like, I believe the church should be able to step in, is like just in the reality that there are a lot of neighbors that just a lot of life has happened and they're really stuck in generational poverty. And so Cross Purpose was really born out of a desire to like take our neighbors wherever they're at and really do our best to help them get entry level career jobs. And so our program is 6 months. It's not a quick fix. We ask people to give a full-time commitment for 6 months. And so if they need a job, they're gonna have to do it on the nights, mornings, and weekends because we just realized there's a heavy lift that we need to do with them. And so that's kind of like where we come in with our coaches. We everything, our entire program is free. So we invest about $24,000 per neighbor that graduates. It's one of our core values is expensive love, right? And so we just look at it like, what does my neighbor need? And that's where we're gonna go and really fight for to get them in their needs. And then the last piece is the social capital, right? There's been a lot of studies around how important it is to actually have a mix of actually um, middle to upper class, like people in poverty that have relationships with people in the middle upper class perform a whole lot better. And because they just, that's just kind of like social capital works, right? And so a big component of our program is for every cohort of 50 to 60 neighbors, we bring in about 20 to 25 what we call allies. And these are people from our community that are willing to come in and build a 6 month relationship of encouragement and just being around and supportive, a lot of story sharing. And we have found that that also actually moves the needle in helping our neighbors escape poverty.
Hi, I'm Haley.
And I'm Alex, and we are the owners of Clean Juice Charlottesville.
Back in 2017, I was diagnosed with a colon disease that medications could not seem to fix. As a Christian, I believe that God had more for me than chronic disease, which led us to learn the power that real organic food has in helping our bodies flourish. Eating these foods helped put my disease in remission.
So that's why we opened Clean Juice. Our mission comes from 3 John 1:2 to help you be healthy in body and strong in spirit. We're right in front of Costco, and we serve organic smoothies, bowls, sandwiches, and so much more. Check out cleanjuice.com.
Yeah, especially to that education point. I remember this was in the New York Times, of all places. It was a opinion article, but it was just saying how, like, especially inner city schools need a radical, just a
Yeah.
radical, totally revision. And I think this was by someone from AEI or some
Yeah.
semi-conservative think tank, but their suggestion was it would be cheaper for the school system and better for the students if you hired one teacher and just kind of homeschooled at the building, like 5, 8 kids,
Yeah.
and either followed them all the way through or just, had this cycle in the
Yeah.
building. Just like you
Hmm.
would save millions of dollars every year. You could
Yes.
pay your teachers more and you'd be able to identify at need and at risk kids so much quicker.
Yeah.
But yeah, I
Hmm.
do think the kind of a radical restructuring of
Hmm.
at least certain inner city schools or just maybe
Right.
American education in general could go a long way.
Yeah.
But we'll get to our first official question.
Okay.
Undocumented migrants, legally called illegal aliens, have surged over the last 4 years. Major cities getting the crew of that media's attention: New York City, Chicago, LA. However, I was surprised to see that Denver has actually received the most per capita in the US.
Hmm.
How have you seen this affect the city writ large, maybe your ministry and your church specifically?
Yeah. So what's interesting is, as I mentioned to you, Rob, I'm an immigrant myself, but after I went to engineering school and kind of, off to seminary and all that, I didn't really, I kind of like achieved the American dream, had a professional job, and wasn't really involved very much in immigration issues at all. I mean, if you talked to me 3 years ago, I just would have had probably the same understanding as the average person in the United States around immigration stuff. Um, God did something really, really impactful in my life at the end of 2022 when in our we have an English service at 10 a.m. at Providence Bible Church, and then at 1 o'clock we had a small Spanish service with probably about 12 to 15 people. And then at 3:30 we have a Swahili service. So we're a multilingual congregation. And so after the English service on one Sunday, um, a group of 60 immigrants came to our church building. And I was just like, I was just so like, who are these people and like, why are they here? And when I started talking to them, they told me that they were Venezuelan. Well, I'm from Colombia. Venezuela and Colombia were basically like brothers. And so I was like, how did you get here? And when they told me that they walked all the way from Venezuela through Colombia, the Darien Gap in Central America, and ended up at our church, like it blew my mind. I just couldn't believe it. And so that afternoon, when I was just processing with my wife, like, what is God doing here? Like, I felt that God was like telling me, like, I just literally sent a group of 60 immigrants to walk thousands of miles to come to your church. And so that was a big wake up call for us. And so my wife and I that afternoon really looked each other in the eyes and felt like God is doing something here. We don't know what exactly He's doing, but and what's our role, but we just sense a very significant calling to just reorient our entire lives to help this group of 60 immigrants. Okay. And so we basically said like our bank accounts, our cars, like our every whatever it is they need, we're gonna provide it for them. And so that was the initial like entry point for me. Um, and so I had no idea that 40,000 more immigrants were behind them. I had zero idea. So I feel like God kind of like did like just kind of tricked me a little bit into like getting into this. But the last 18 months, we have really it's been a full-time nights, mornings, and weekends beyond our regular, bivocational job of just serving our immigrant brothers and sisters. And so that's kind of how we got into it. The impact on our city has been felt tremendously. Denver proper is only a city of 750,000 people, and we have served 40,000 immigrants in the last year. It's just an incredible spike. So yes, that has stressed our budgets. Our city budgets have been stressed to the limit. Our shelters are just have been maxed out. We've had people, groups, encampments of 200 families out under bridges in the middle of the winter. And so it's definitely something that has been felt across the entire city for the last 18 months.
Hey, Juan, I'm Walter. Sorry, I was
Hey,
late
Walter.
getting back from a job site. I want
Yeah,
to ask a question in terms of, adding, what is that, a little over 5% to your city population.
yeah.
What are, my question has to do with, are people able to get work permits who are here, undocumented? Like
Yeah.
how is that going?
Yeah. So, okay. So, yeah. And so I'll get to the work permits in a minute. So immediately, I'm a very practical person. And so as more and more people started coming, it's middle of winter. And so I was like, housing is like, it's really hard for you to get a job and be stable in a job if you're like in the streets, right? So thankfully, the city of Denver, and I'm really proud of the leadership of the city of Denver, they stepped up to the plate and said, we cannot have families like sleeping on the street. That's just not the type of city we are. So they started really putting resources into like the housing. So once the city stepped in, and like, this is actually a really beautiful example of like the city doing what they can do, and then churches and nonprofits jumping on board and going like, okay, now let's collaborate together. So I began telling people, okay, great, the city's going to give you 6 weeks of a shelter. So I'm coming alongside of you, and I'm going to tell you right now, your number one job is go out there and find a job. Find employment anywhere that you can find it. That's your number one job. And if you get that job and you can save $1,000, I will meet you in the middle and I will get you an apartment. And at that time when I was promising people that, I had zero idea how I was going to do it. In the back of my head, I was like, okay, if I write the checks for it, like I already told the Lord, everything is there. So in my mind, I'm like, if my wife and I coordinate, write the checks, great. And so every week on Sundays, when they come to the 1 o'clock service, people will be like, I still don't have a job. And I'm like, hey, let's pray. I'm here with you. Like, I'm happy to, I'll take the church boss and I'll go to the shelter at 5:30 in the morning. And anybody's looking for a job, I don't have jobs, but like, I'll take anyone in the city. Like, let's go. And so at 5:30 in the morning, the bus would get filled up and I would just drive around helping people go and apply for jobs or whatever. Eventually, people started getting jobs and they would come to church all excited, like, I got a job. And I'm like, okay, now your job is save $1,000. Okay. And so that's kind of like how we started partnering together. And out of that, I originally thought I was going to do 12 apartments. I figured, okay, I got 60 people I'm going to help. If I do 12 apartments, that's like 5 people per apartment. That sounds about right. Well, God stretched that whole thing from 12 apartments to 100 apartments. We ended up doing 100 of those. And they were like fully furnished. When people moved in, there were beds, couches, full kitchens, and like some groceries for like 3, 4 days to like they can cook meals and make arepas. That's what Venezuelans like to make. Anyway, so we just saw God like, and there was a combination of like obviously our money, other people started giving money, then the city started helping a little bit with some first month's rent and stuff like that, and so it just became like a full effort. But it was beautiful. Then let's talk a little bit about the legal stuff, okay? Because I think there's a lot of confusion out there. I was actually very confused myself. And over the last 18 months, I've kind of gotten a little bit of a master's degree in legal stuff. And I know enough to like kind of like maybe be a little dangerous. But um, back in July, no, sorry, back in like September, the Biden administration granted Venezuelans something that's called TPS. I don't know if you've heard about TPS. It's called temporary protected status. Okay. And this is not a new thing. A lot of people think like, oh, Biden's just doing this as like a new thing. The United States has granted TPS to lots of different people groups since the World War II era. And it was really born out of like countries understanding like, hey, like Ukraine, let's say, when Russia started bombing Ukraine, a lot of people like Ukrainians started going all over Europe and then coming to the United States. And it's kind of like the United States going like, hey, we understand something's really broken in your country. We get it. So like yes, you can come here and we'll give you temporary protected status. And that means you can get a work permit and you'll be able to work legally and all that. Okay. Um, and usually when a group of people gets that protected status, it usually is renewed. It's got to be renewed every 18 months. And historically in the United States is renewed. So we have a lot of people groups that have had TPS status for 20 years, right? Or more. Well, the United States, the Biden administration,
The Haitians have had
Haitian,
that.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
Haitians have
Haitians,
had that
some
for a very long time.
Afghanistan, people from Afghanistan. So it's a practice in the U.S., which I think is great. It's a great, very human, humanitarian way of like treating immigrants that are really struggling and all that. So the United States basically looked at Venezuela and said, "Hey, we get it. The country is really broken, and I don't think they'll ever acknowledge it, but I think the Biden administration was looking at saying." We have put a lot of sanctions against Venezuela because they have a crazy president, and that's really tanked the whole economy. And so we understand why they need to leave and why many of them are coming up. So let's give them TPS. Okay, so that's a little bit of the context of how that came about. When I found that out, well, a lot of my friends have come and could apply for TPS. But then when I started digging into it, it's a very rigorous. The immigration is, there's a lot of paperwork, a lot of proofs that you got to bring. You got to hire a lawyer. Lawyers are charging up to $2,000 per person to do this TPS thing. So what I discovered was like, this is an incredible opportunity for my friends that I love that just arrived into our city, but it's so expensive. They don't know the language. They don't know how to navigate this paperwork and all that. And so that's when I first started like going like, man, there's got to be something we can do that I can do to help my friends. That I helped get apartments, and they were a part of our church and all that. So that kind of led to me start doing my own research, and I started printing. Like I would go to the immigration website and download a 250 page legal handbook on how to do TPS. And I'm like,
Man.
I literally sat down with a friend of mine. His name is Yoni, and I said, Yoni, on a Saturday night, Saturday evening, and I was like, I'm gonna do this TPS for you. We're gonna figure it out. And we spent 4 hours and like barely got to like the first page of the application because I was just like, I didn't know anything.
Wow. Yeah.
So long story short, it's a miracle. God allowed me to talk to the director of the newcomers office at the state of Colorado. And I let her know, and I said, hey, I know like 200 Venezuelans that come to our church that we've helped house, and they qualify for TPS, but they're like on the outside looking in. I mean, they just don't have the money to hire a lawyer. Uh, and so she said, actually, it's interesting that you said that because we are actually, as a state, we want to help immigrant Venezuelans get this TPS. And so we are happy to do a training, and you can actually learn how to do it. It's actually not that hard once you kind of know what you need to do. And I was like, oh my God, sign me up. Well, what I didn't know is that the state of Colorado, I was just a pastor, um, was actually paying other nonprofits to actually full-time hire staff to help Venezuelans with their TPS process. Well, I didn't know that. So I started basically, I created a mobile office, and I had scanners and printers and computers. And because we had done all these apartments, I would just go like, hey, friends, my wife and I and my friend Heidi, we're going to come on Tuesday night, and we're going to do TPSs for everyone in the house. And we're not leaving tonight until everybody, darn it, we get it done. And so we just started end of December, January, middle of February, just every weekend, every night, because we wanted to help our friends. Well, I didn't know it, but um, at the end of a month and a half, we did about 150 TPSs, and we were like dead, because we've been working the whole year with apartments. We were exhausted. And it turns out that we did the most TPSs out of any other nonprofit in the city that was hiring full-time workers. And so the state came to us and said, hey, we need you to do 1,000.
What?
A
Wow.
thousand. And I was like, actually, it's funny. I was just talking to my wife, and we're actually getting out of the business. We're gonna die. And they're like, no, no, no. You have really figured out how to do this well. You're really good at it. Blah blah blah. So I started negotiating with them, and they gave me $100,000 so that I could actually hire a team of 4 to 5 people. And then in a span of 11 weeks, we did 1,000 TPSs.
Wow.
And
That's
it was,
amazing. That's
yeah, it was
awesome.
really cool. So anyway, so we just saw God provide 1,000. And so each one of those TPSs has a work permit, social security card, and we just changed the game for like a lot of people. And now they can get regular jobs. They're fully like, and they can just, yeah, they can work, they can get any job they want. So I would say that's one avenue in which we have helped 1,000 people get jobs. There's a whole nother avenue, Walter, where immigrants that come through the border, and this is now open to any immigrant. This is not just Venezuelan.
Okay.
TPS is just for Venezuelans. It's a special thing for them. I don't know if you've heard about CBP One. Is a phone app. This is definitely new with the Biden administration, where they let 30,000 people a month enter. And basically, what the Biden administration said is, hey, here's a little bit of a process through this phone app to get organized. And if you can get a meeting with a Border Patrol agent through this app, we will let 30,000 of you come in to the United States. The great thing about this is we're going to let you in, and presumably you're coming in because you're seeking asylum. Um, and so we're going to let you get a work permit ahead of the asylum so you can actually start working while you're here in the United States while you put your asylum. So we'll give you a limited work permit for about 18 months. Okay. So all of a sudden, because Denver's a hot destination, a lot of people started coming here that actually had a CBP1 status. And if an immigration lawyer is hearing this, I'm like, I may have the language incorrectly. There's not such a thing as a CBP1 status, but it's like you can actually legally now get a work permit because you have the CBP1 application. Well, it turns out we ended up partnering with another law office, and we have done 1,000 of those. So altogether, since December of this year, we've helped 2,000 individuals get their work permits. And if you multiply that times households, I mean, it's probably like close to 10,000 people that are now benefiting children and grandparents and all that.
Right. That's awesome,
As a
man.
result of this. So anyway, so yeah, so I kind of got into all of this, and then the third rail is asylum. Okay, so we have TPS, we have CBP1, and then those who don't qualify for either of those, when you come in through the border, if you pass whatever the border patrol, and to be honest, I don't know exactly what are the questions they ask, but they have some diagnostic questions to assess if you possibly have an asylum case. So most of the people that come through the border, they come legally in the sense of like the border patrol agents are actually letting them through the door with a court document that says, okay, we're letting you through and you have 1 year to actually apply for asylum. Okay. Um, right now I'm exploring about how we can maybe do 1,000 asylums. Now all of a sudden this theme of 1,000 has become a thing. And so now I'm working with other lawyers, and asylum cases are the hardest ones because lawyers charge anywhere up to $8,000 to $10,000 per person to
Yeah.
the application. Well, that is prohibitive for anybody coming through the southern border. I mean, they just
Right.
don't have that money.
They don't.
So
They
I'm
don't have that.
looking for ways to how can we do this for like $700 and really streamline some things. So that's kind of where my world is right now.
Yeah. Well, that's really awesome. Yeah. Again, sorry, I was like, I have a slight question about the housing. When you were talking about the apartments, are these pre-built apartments that are already existing, or are you guys like, hey, where can we find some land and
Yeah,
build some
no,
apartments?
no. This is all just market rent. Just
Okay.
just looking on the internet and finding apartments for our neighbors, and that's a whole. We can do a whole podcast on housing, man. Woo! Yeah,
Oh,
that's a
yeah,
whole
yeah.
other thing. But imagine you're a mom with two kids, and you have to go get a job, and you don't know the
Right.
language, and then now you got to go and find an apartment, and so I kind of became a minor expert on how to do apartments, and I basically did all the applications. I just basically was like, I looked at their mom and I say, "Hey, I got you. You go to work, keep doing what you're doing. Give me like your passport or your, government ID. Give me da da da. Give me your employment letter." And I would just basically fill out all the applications, call, and just advocated for them. And that's how I was able to. I pretty much did all 100 applications for those
Yeah.
apartments myself.
I feel so. I'm in home building myself and remodeling, and I love the idea of housing and development. And I feel like I don't want to say unique opportunity, but there. I wonder
Hmm.
how multifamily developers could be thinking about, hey,
Yeah,
there's a group of people, they're going to be here a long time.
yeah,
They need market rate housing.
yeah.
There's creative ways you can go about doing that. So,
Yeah, and
all
they're
right,
all paying they're all paying market rate. So yeah, it's like we're not asking for a discount. It's just like, hey,
right,
they're contributing members of our society, and there's a whole other set of papers out there, white papers, and newspaper articles. I'm not an economist, but what I'm hearing is that for sure the influx of immigrants coming in has actually really quite helped the
the
economy
economy.
and
Yeah,
stabilize us from the inflation and all that stuff. So, yeah, we need them. Like Denver needs. Well, we've absorbed 40,000 people, and now the Denver metro area is obviously 2 million people. So it's like it's not like just only 750,000 people are in the
right.
in the city. It's just that Denver heroically single-handedly spent like 70 to 90 million dollars because
Yeah,
Denver is a great city like that. Yeah, it's helped the economy. I mean, you go all the construction sites, it's all Latinos, and the vast majority of Venezuelans over there shoveling and lifting and doing cement and all of that stuff.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Nobody else wants
It's
to do those jobs. Nobody
no,
else in the
no,
city wants to do that.
and again, so Christianity, conservatism, culture. I typically am. I consider myself a conservative, and I'm not one of the. I'm not a. I don't go the whole MAGA thing or whatnot.
Yeah, yeah,
When
yeah.
people talk about, we're going to deport, I'm like, most of the guys I work with do not speak English,
Yeah,
hard workers,
yeah,
and let's just call it what it is. If you look at any multifamily project going on, you want to know who's doing all the work?
yeah.
It is Latino immigrants.
Yes,
So,
it is. And they love it. They're good at it. They're to them, that job is 10 times better than anything that we're doing in South America. Their kids are here in America getting an education. I mean, it's like they will do that all day long, you know. We have electricians, we got plumbers. I mean, it's beautiful to see the gifts and the skills that they bring, and then they can contribute into our economy. So
So I didn't realize until we started this, but you said you actually worked for Denver City Schools for a little bit as a bivocational pastor. That really segues nicely into our next question, which is
yeah.
what impact have you seen, or maybe through your
Hmm.
contacts on the Denver City Schools specifically? I've seen several news articles where,
Hmm.
if LA and New York and Chicago are bad, like Denver is even that's an
Yeah.
even heavier absorption there. So
Hmm.
what can you talk about some of the problems,
Yeah, no, yeah,
maybe
no,
both politically, culturally, and just
yeah.
like trying to teach kids who don't know English, who've just been here for like 2 weeks, like just give us a rundown.
No, totally, totally. Yeah. Good. Yeah, I'm glad you bring this up. So I'm very passionate about education. I've actually here in our neighborhood have helped start a charter school called University Prep. I have a founding board member the last 12 years. We serve about 600 kids in our neighborhood. And these are all like 90% free and reduced lunch kits. And we fundraise extra money to provide even all the necessary things that they are going to need to succeed. And my wife also works for Denver Public Schools. She's a school counselor at a school in Green Valley, here in the city, and it's a middle school and a high school. So my wife actually, I through my wife, I got to really understand what's happening to the school system, and we had, and I can't remember all the numbers, but it's basically imagine overnight a school district has their budget all set for the year, and then a 5% increase in students comes in, and it turns out that these are the hardest students to serve, right? They don't know the language, they're basically homeless, and so that hit every school in the metro area for sure, especially in the city core. So in the school, my wife, she's a middle school counselor, and I think she has a caseload of 300 kids. And I think her caseload increased by like another 35 kids in middle school. So on top of her regular job that she's already maxed out, she had to basically single-handedly like just help 35 kids get adjusted to school's culture. She knows Spanish, so she became kind of like the go-to person for all these Venezuelan and Colombian kids that are coming into the area, talking to parents and just basically helping them troubleshoot. And it wasn't unusual for my wife to be like, two of my kids, their moms came in and basically told me they're living in the car right now in the middle of the winter, because they're time in the shelter right now. So school is hard enough right now, and then you layer just another 5% of like basically like homeless families. And yeah, it strained everything to the max. But again, I'm really proud of the city and the resiliency of the city. It's not perfect. The minute you throw an extra 5% of students, you just know that school year is going to look very different. And so, but everybody just pulled in, and my wife was really encouraged about being in meetings where like teachers are like, okay, let's take a deep breath and let's keep talking every day about how are we going to show up for these kids, how are we going to pivot, how are we going to rearrange classrooms. That was a whole other thing that they had to do, is just basically start reshuffling classrooms based on reading levels and language levels, and all that stuff. And I would say the last thing about education, many people don't know this that are not in education. All the school budgets, you have a district has like a $1 billion. City of Denver could be $1 billion budget, and then every school underneath gets their budget based on how many students go into that school. So all that is set based on October student counts, and that's a hard number, and that's the budget that you're going to get for your school. Well, the majority of these kids came in after October, so all the schools were basically having to serve all these kids with no extra money. And that's probably kind of like the story across the board, around immigration, is the federal government just doesn't, there's not a good way to like really have a conversation and be thoughtful about, hey, where is extra money needed? Like legitimately, like. So that's been another big frustrating thing around education because every teacher in the school wants to serve the kids, but at some point in time you got to hire more teachers and help to actually help the kids. So yeah. So anyway, so it's been a lot. It's been hard. I'm curious to see what's going to happen this year. Hopefully, the school districts are a little bit more, you know, prepared and budgets have been adjusted to hire extra teachers for that.
You mentioned that Denver is a desirable place for immigrants. It's a desirable place for tourists. For most of the 2010s, I went to Denver almost every year for some reason or other, whether business or friend travel or personal vacation.
Yeah.
Going to see a friend get married, two different friends twice.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what besides like obviously a good economy and more of a liberal city, especially with the sanctuary status, do you think that that kind of sanctuary status plays into its desirability, or is it just similar to a lot of other big cities where it's they they know someone, there's a lot of for lack of a better term, chain
Yeah.
migration going on that just leads to a bigger pull? I imagine there has to be something a little special about Denver just because it's seen again per
Mm-hmm.
capita a higher increase than any of our bigger cities.
Totally. Yeah, it's funny. I whenever I talk to people from the East Coast, I'm always like, oh yeah, Denver's terrible. We get crazy snowstorms. Oh my God. It's like I'm just always like but no, the truth is
Don't
like you
go to
said,
Denver. Denver, don't go to Denver.
yeah,
Denver
it's
is
terrible. I mean, it's a cow town, you know? No, but yeah, Denver is a beautiful city. It's a world-class city. I always say Denver is an easy place to do hard things. So um, I think I think obviously New York City is just migrants just it's just the magnet for migrants. And there's just so many migrants that have resettled in New York City. That's just like naturally like when anywhere around the world is going to migrate to the United States, they probably have a cousin or not. You know, it's just so New York is a natural place. I was actually surprised about Chicago, that turned out to be another hotspot. And for sure, out of the three, Denver, you would never expect a South American to resettle in Denver. I think what happened was, you know, because migrants figured out how to cross the Darien Gap, which, by the way, there are tons of articles out there. I think the New York Times did a beautiful job back in like November of last year of like just it's a really traumatic experience.
yeah. They
And as I
actually
sit
the
down,
daily the New York Times
yeah.
podcast. I'll link that. They have a full like 40-minute
Whew.
episode about just crossing the Darien Gap.
It's so traumatic. Like all our friends just like it's almost therapeutic for them to talk to us about it. Like, and we don't ask any questions about it, but it's just like they saw some things that were really scary and sad and traumatic. But anyways, because they were able to figure out how to walk, and you know, many of them are crossing through the southern border, especially El Paso. Um, Obviously nobody wants to they know they don't want to get stuck in Texas, right? They're like they get it. Texas is fed up with it. So a lot of times El Paso to Denver is kind of like what from what I've heard is just people were like, I'm just trying to go get out of Texas, and whether through Texas providing buses or whatever, it's just easy to hop on a bus and just do the drive to Denver. Um, Most of the people early on they were not planning on being here in Denver, and many of them were planning to go to Canada or other places. But because Denver is just a really kind city. Once we started doing the sheltering system, people just were like, okay, I've been traveling for 3 months, and like I can just take a 6 week, like I got a hotel room for 6 weeks here. Now there's like 8 people in this hotel room, but it's better sleeping in the street. I've been sleeping in the streets the whole way up here, and I get 3 meals, and so I think they just kind of were able to like let their guard down, rest, and then now began to find jobs and all that. And so I don't think it was like a thoughtful like I'm going to Denver. As a matter of fact, like I don't know anybody that left Venezuela going like I'm gonna go to Denver. They're just like I'm going to America. And so that's kind of how it ended up. I know that Denver has got people say it's a sanctuary city. Actually, last time I checked, Denver's officially not a sanctuary city. They've never come out, I don't think, and said we are a sanctuary city. They're just a friendly city to immigrants, and so that's kind of interpreted as a sanctuary city. But I don't think that has much to do with why they started here. And then, like you said, once a core of immigrants start settling, then the chain reaction comes in. I mean, I've seen almost all my friends have been able to bring their wives and kids, and now they're like out of the 100 apartments that we did, that thing has multiplied to 500 because after a year of like 6 guys together making it happen, another family shows up and they got to go in another apartment, but now they got a job and we help them with the work permit. It's just like it's working the way it's supposed to. So I think now it's just a magnet because just a lot of people settled here, and the city of Denver will forever be changed. There's no doubt about it.
So you've already somewhat alluded to this when you said in our opening about seeing a Somali people couple family come up to your church. I can only assume a lot of immigrants you work with are Spanish speaking Latinos, but how often do you see like you already mentioned Africans? What about Asians, Central
Yeah.
Asians, Afghans, Iraqis, Syrians? Basically, the non-typical that we would think, whether
Yeah.
Muslim, African, maybe like Christian Coptic coming from Egypt. What do you see a lot of difference outside of the what a lot of Americans probably assume, or certainly a lot of the number coming up from South America?
Yeah.
How differentiated is it, or do most Americans have a kind of right sense it's a lot of Venezuelan exiles, Mexicans, not exiles, but Venezuelans escaping
Yeah.
the horrible economy of Venezuela, Mexicans escaping the ravages of the drug trade there, which is
Yeah. So yeah, no, I've definitely before this South American wave of immigration kind of started coming. If you looked at the immigration numbers of by country, especially through the southern border, yeah, obviously Mexico was the biggest, right? They're our closest neighbor, and they all have family here and all that. So has always been like the front runner, and then you have Salvador and Nicaragua and all those. So it's basically Central America, right? Oh, and by the way, just another perspective here. Because nobody ever walked through the Darien Gap because it was so dangerous before. If you were a South America and you ended up in the United States, you had to fly, right? From whatever country you're to, like Miami or New York, somewhere on the East Coast. Which, well, if you're gonna fly, you have to get a visa and a passport, that automatically, basically, like most of the immigrants that were coming are like middle class to upper class South Americans, right? And so now for the first time ever in South America, things have gotten so bad down there. They're like I've talked to so many friends, and I'm like, tell me about the day. There was a day that you literally grabbed your 2 kids and you said, I'm walking and I'm not coming back. Like tell me about that day. And they inevitably start describing just how hopeless and horrible their situation was for all kinds of reasons. And they just grabbed their kids and their little backpack and with no money just walked. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so now all of that's coming through. Well, um, along the journey, I was shocked when my friends were telling me, like, oh yeah, Haitians. I mean, Haitians go right to Colombia and they're walking with us. Like Haitians, like, yeah. And people from Africa and Chinese, it's
China, yeah.
basically a whole multi-ethnic,
Yeah.
multinational thing. They're all
Yep.
walking up through Central America. So that was surprising. Another, I
Are,
just
are they
discovered.
coming to are they specifically coming? You mentioned Colombia. Are they specifically targeting Colombia for any reason, or are they or South American countries in general are kind of like, well, you're coming in, but we all know you're not staying here, so sure we can just let you in because we know you're going to be gone in a
Yeah,
few
and
weeks.
I don't know all the details on that. I think probably it's easier to get a flight. I mean, I don't think Mexico is allowing any of them to come through. So I
Mm,
think they have a closer border. So I think it's easier than if it's not Mexico, then it's probably easier just to go to Bogota, Colombia, and then just come right up.
right. And then go up through there.
Yeah, but here's a crazy thing. I just discovered this, and I didn't even know this was happening here in our city. I was talking to somebody and they told me that there are 2,000 people from Mauritania, and it's Mauritania. It's like north of Senegal, and
Oh,
it's an Arab speaking. It's Muslim. It's a Muslim
okay.
nation. They're Arab speaking, and they still practice slavery. And
Shut
there
up.
were 2,000 here in Denver. 2,000 ex-slaves escaped, went to Colombia somehow, and then literally walked up the Darien Gap and ended up here in Denver. And they're like in Aurora off of Colfax. and it's
Yep.
2,000 of them, and most of them are men. Like 98% of them are men, and like they're here, and they walk the whole journey. So that there was an article in the paper like nobody knows they're here. They're struggling. There's like no support for them. And I was just shocked.
And
So yeah.
and what a way for like an evangelistic opportunity, what a way for the
Oh my
church to step
God.
in. Like those
Yes.
people, it is highly likely that those people have one, never met a Christian. Two,
Mm-mm.
if they had, they've certainly
Yeah.
never read the Bible, or heard the gospel preached, whether
Yes.
it's directly the word or just like from a pulpit. Like what an evangelistic opportunity.
And Robin, I know we're probably like almost out of time and all that, but let me just tell you reflections on that because I think this is a good thing to talk about. So going back to my story, back in December 4th, my wife and I are we're in the kitchen looking at each other in the eyes, going like, we sensing that God's doing something huge. And so we decided to rearrange the entirety of our lives to support this immigrants that we thought were only 60. Um, and then our service, though, we only had about 12 to 15 Spanish speakers. Now we have close to 300 on a regular basis. And when we have Bible studies, so we are loving them, getting them apartments, helping them get jobs. They're part of our family. We told them we are rearranging our lives to be in relationship with you. We basically became missionaries. I didn't even know it. I was going to become not a pastor, but a missionary. And so we started having Bible studies, invite them to our home to have meals, and then like let's read the scriptures. And I would go and these are Venezuelans, but like to your point, Muslims. And I would just say, hey, have you guys heard of the parable of the prodigal son? Literally nobody was like, no, never heard of that.
Wow.
And I would just we would just read the scriptures in Spanish, and they would just literally be debating, like, oh my God, and it's just like chaos. They
Mm.
had never heard the gospel. And then when I was just pointing out the love of Christ and the prodigal son being accepted, and they were just like, we've had Bible studies where like everybody's in tears because they're like now understanding the gospel for the first time. So we've sat
Dude,
there with
that's
like
awesome.
charts, helping them understand like this is chapter one. This number here is like chapter. They don't even know what a chapter and a verse is. And what a beautiful opportunity. So like our entire church of 300, like very few people grew up in the church. It's a whole completely new field to introduce people to
Wow.
Christ. They're culturally Christians. I don't have to explain to them. I don't have to apologetically prove them that God exists or that Jesus,
Right.
is God. I don't have to do that. That's the beautiful thing about it. But they have never heard the gospel ever.
Mm.
So yes, is
Man.
a that gets
So,
me excited. That's what gets me excited.
okay, so Juan, granted, again, I watched the what is it called? The RNC last night. You know, Trump speech.
Oh yeah,
Oh God, it was too long.
I didn't see it,
So
but
what?
so
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Uh, I don't know if I struggle, but I find it interesting, right? We can say, whether or not America's a Christian nation, you know, you have conservative evangelicals who want a strong border,
yeah.
but you know they also want to preach Christ. Like how how do you view that? What does it mean? Like as Christians, can we say, yeah, we need to have a strong border, or is it like uh, from your
Yeah.
perspective, how do you handle that? How do you
Yeah, no.
balance?
Oh, thanks for asking that question. I've given a lot of thought to that. Certainly more thought than I did in my entire 30s and mid 40s. Uh, I think where I land is I we can have a robust debate as Christians around what's our policy around the border. Like I think I'm certainly can understand why people would be concerned about that, and they would want to
Right.
like, hey, we need to like get really serious about it. However, this is always like in politics, there's always tensions, right? And there's always things that we seek to not we don't want to see things for what they are. And Walter, like you were talking about, we haven't gotten honest about how helpful the vast majority of immigrants are for our economy and our country. Like we have not.
Yep.
So like it's hard to have a debate about like the wall. If we can actually go like, hey, actually, we actually do need, and I think a lot of economists actually believe like we need more people to replace workers, and like so that we
Right.
have like a real honest conversation about like actually there's value that they're bringing.
Right.
Sure, are there some costs and all that? Yeah, but overall, they're actually helping us in the economy. Let's get really honest about what is, and let's have that debate and like that acknowledgement, and then out of that we can go, hey, okay, but we also need to have security. Of course, we got to have security. So like, how do we have a humane path? Human,
Right.
and I would love for Christians to like engage thoughtfully in that conversation, right? And for
Hmm.
me, it's really, and I'm also like I'm like an independent. I'm not really not in this camp or that.
Yeah.
I'm not.
Yeah.
You will not peg me in any camp. I will not allow you to peg me in any camp. But it does. My observation is the left, by and large, is the ones that are at least trying to bring the most humanitarian ideas to
Mm.
policy, right? And I'm just going like, man, if there's a group of people that should be bringing the best ideas to the table for debate, the left might have the worst ideas, but at least they're truly looking at it from the humanitarian lens. And that
Hmm.
from a conservative perspective, I look at them and be like, I disagree with that. Great. Well, let's come up with the best ideas on how we can
Yeah.
actually like be loving to our foreign neighbors, which by the way, like the Bible has a lot to say, right?
Right.
About that. And so, but we just don't seem to be able to generate anything
Yeah.
only than just build that wall, you know? So I just feel
Yeah.
like I just look at that and I'm like, oh man, we're missing an opportunity here to be thoughtful
I,
and to
I've
lead.
always, I listen, like I say, always, I look at it and to say that immigrants don't add value to our society would be foolish. To say that they're stealing Americans' jobs is just, I'm pretty sure, just a flat out lie.
It's not
Uh,
happening.
it's
It's
not
not.
happening. And I felt like that was the debate even 20 years ago. It was
Yeah.
like, we're like, well, who's going to mow your grass? Who's working in the restaurants?
And just look at it like, okay, I came in as an immigrant as, back in 1989. There's lots of people like me that are now like now we like grew up here in the United States after the initial investment of education and opportunity,
Hmm.
and like they're working in engineering, law offices, like nonprofits,
Yeah.
like this country was beautiful. Like this is the beautiful thing about America. It's like there are kids
Yeah.
that are coming through the border right now that every time I see a 13-year-old kid come through our church, I look him in the eyes and I go, I was you. I want you to know that I was you 35 years ago.
Wow.
Like you can do this. I'm gonna help you. I'm here to support your parents. Da da da. I believe in those kids. Those kids are
Yeah.
gonna be so gritty, and man, they're gonna like make America great.
So that's why I think that's why I think it's fascinating is instead of you have to like I think you can balance border security and
Yeah,
humanitarian. I think you have to have a vision and say, look, I like conservatives like imagine all the doctors and all these things that we lost because of abortion. And I'm like,
yeah,
yes, that is very true. But I'm also like, imagine all the people who could be doctors and lawyers and inventors and teachers and policemen
totally.
doing God
Entrepreneurs,
entrepreneurs doing honest
Yeah,
labor,
I mean,
honest
we
work.
definitely don't want entrepreneurs like that half Iranian man in Steve Jobs. I mean, I'm just throwing that out there.
Oh my God.
Or that,
Yeah,
Sa- or that, or the richest man in the world is an African. Elon
yeah.
Musk is South African. We don't want those type of
Ooh,
immigrants.
okay.
No,
No,
none
we
of
don't want.
that.
So I just think
Yeah,
it stinks because yes, I believe we can have a strong southern border. Which I'll say this: the wall was not 100% built. That's what Trump said all the whole time last night. Anyways,
yeah. Let me tell
we
you.
can
Let me
have a
tell you. Okay, hey, I have so many friends that were deported 4 or 5 times. I have a friend of mine that
uh
basically he's detailed his entire journey, and he would like get deported back to the southern tip of Mexico. As soon as he got released, he started coming right back. He's like, "There's nothing back home. I'll just keep going and going against the
yeah,
wall," and he would just through all kinds of stuff would basically take the final train ride, one of those crazy death-defying rides. He would stop, and he wouldn't even stop to get a meal. He would cross the river right like immediately, stop and start
just
like
shoot.
boom, boom, boom. The first time he made it all the way he went through Eagle Pass, walked all the way to San Antonio, and was
Hmm.
grabbed at a parking lot somewhere and shipped all the way right back. Um, that wall, man, I don't know.
It ain't gonna do nothing.
It ain't gonna do nothing.
It ain't.
And here's one more thing I do want to say. We're talking about
Yeah.
policies and all that. Here's the other reality for the church today. It also doesn't matter what the policies have been or are or whatever. The truth of the matter
Right.
is, like, all these immigrants are in our cities, in our neighborhoods, and we have. Doesn't matter what the policies are. If somebody's homeless and a mom, like, they deserve to be helped. I mean, like, we have a
Exactly.
responsibility today through the
Today, who's my
scriptures, and
neighbor?
they're our neighbor. So, like, we can't. The church cannot opt out.
Nope.
We have to re-engage. We have a mandate to help our neighbor.
Yeah.
So anyway, so I
And
think it's
yeah,
just that's how I really want the church to engage in that, and there's tons of room for debate and all that. I mean,
exactly.
absolutely. And I don't have the best solutions. I honestly don't know what the best solution in the southern border is. I will submit to whatever it is, whatever the solutions are. But let's come up with better ideas. I know this broke the whole southern border like system is completely broken, man. Oh,
Oh
let me tell
yeah,
you one more thing.
absolutely.
Oh my God, you guys! Almost every week, I'll tell. Just 2 days
Yeah.
ago,
Yeah.
I had a kid show up at our building. And basically, because we've helped so many people, like just people come to our church building. I don't even know what's going to come through the building. I don't have appointments, but we have like 20 to 40 people show up every day. And I had this 20-year-old kid that basically
Mm.
said, "Hey, I just got out of a detention center. I crossed over the border, like like hundreds of thousands of people have, and somehow they detained me, and I was detained for a year and 3 months."
Oh wow.
And then she just got released, and he doesn't even know what he was detained for. And like, he's like, "I guess I'm released now," And I'm just like, imagine the expense. How much money did we spend to detain this kid? He was being shipped around. He spent time in Buffalo, New York, and Louisiana, and ended up here in Denver.
Hey, I mean, we
Wow.
just spent $250 million on a pier in Gaza that worked for 10 days, and that was it.
Yeah,
$250 million blows my
yeah, and
mind.
it's like we make all these decisions, and it's like, why is this? This kid's been detained for like 5% of his life in prison for just the
Yeah.
crime is he was poor and crossed the border.
Yeah.
And so anyway, so it's sad and broken, man.
Well,
Yeah.
Juan, we want to respect your time. It's
Yeah.
also
Thank you so
Friday for
much.
anyone
Sorry I was
else's.
late.
Is there
No
any
worries.
before we go, can you direct our listeners to any socials or websites that you think would be important? Besides, we'll put Cross Purpose down in the down the not in the comments, down in the info section for this. But outside of that, where can we find you? Just give us
Yeah,
connection points.
another thing that you could, if you want to put that in there, my wife and I started a nonprofit called rootedwithroofs.org, rootedwithroofs.org. It tells a little bit more of our story as well. We'll keep doing updates on, things that we're doing and all that stuff. So, and there's a resource page in there as well. So if people want to look into some other things, they can also reference that as well. But yeah, I mean, I don't have like any major like funny thing is I've been so busy the last 18 months. I haven't even read one book. Like I haven't read this first time in my
Oh man.
life. I didn't read one book this whole last year. There was just no time. So honestly,
Yeah.
man, I don't even have any. I'm just out there doing stuff. I can't even tell you anything to read right now.
We'll drop those in along with
Yeah.
the New York Times, the Daily about crossing the Darien
Yeah.
Gap. But otherwise, Juan, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your ministry.
Mhm.
Yeah, and we
Thank you.
this was great. We could have three more conversations, and maybe we will about this topic and your expertise on it. So thank you so much for coming to Church Coffee, and Juan, hope to see you later.
Amen. Thank you.
Thank you so
Bye-bye.
much.
Our album art was done by my wife, and our theme music was composed by TJ Stokes.